Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Wayne, and this week we're going to talk about intrusive thoughts and how to handle them. So you already know that dealing with intrusive thoughts and the painful reminders and triggers is crucial to surviving infidelity. It's the thing that can trip couples up for the longest period of time after the discovery. The emotional flooding that comes with the trauma of infidelity can be devastating for the betrayed spouse. So it's vitally important for the unfaithful spouse that they know how to handle it and respond appropriately. You know, in previous newsletters, Rick has talked about post-traumatic infidelity syndrome, and he's explained in pretty good detail what happens chemically and physiologically in the brain and the realities of what happens when we get triggered and the emotional flooding begins. There's rage and verbal abuse, physical abuse, fight or flight, marathon questions and sessions. There's threatening, sudden changes in decisions like making the demands that somebody packs their bags and leave while knowing that you're really committed to working it out. It can all be so confusing. There's other highly charged reactions. These are just a few of the common signs that you or your spouse may be flooding. And when we're emotionally flooded, we're in this survival state and not necessarily in our rational, wise mind. Our new reality will inevitably include flashbacks and triggers and intrusive thoughts. Surviving infidelity is dependent on learning how to cope with this new reality. We're going to talk about what to do and what not to do, starting with what not to do. One of the most common things that I see almost daily is where the unfaithful spouse will try to give the betrayed spouse some assurance that they will never happen again, everything's going to be okay, honey, you're living in the past, and they want to act like it never happened. When your spouse is flooding, in their mind, everything is not okay. For you, it might be because you've become clean and cleared everything out, but they're left holding it. And telling them that it'll be okay only can escalate the situation as their mind starts to race and they begin to let you know their reality. Instead, what you can do at that moment in time is just listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, I think. So learning to listen well, deeply, generously to your spouse, and you work whatever program you're working, that's going to be much more helpful because actions do speak louder than words at that point in time. The other thing people do is they try to control or manage their response. Remember, when someone is emotionally flooded, they're in this survival mode and they're not going to be able to be rational in that moment. Trying to reason with them or manage them or their response is usually going to get things rolling and things are going to get much worse. So again, you're going to hear me say this a lot through this video, is learn to listen. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to what they're feeling. If things are unsafe, certainly take a break, but don't engage there and try to rationalize with them. Just listen with empathy and compassion. Another thing that usually annoys the betrayed spouse is self-deprecation. When you move into shame and guilt, what you do then is you make it about you. And there's a good chance that when you make it all about you, it'll only escalate your partner or your spouse's flooding. Stay in a position of being concerned for them and what it's like for them. The greatest gift you can give them is to take responsibility for your actions and work towards forgiving yourself and work your program and be concerned with helping them heal. Don't let it become about you. Remember that they're the ones sacrificing everything just to work through the pain that they didn't cause to begin with. So keep their healing in the forefront of your mind. Your own time will come, but initially you'll need to work on being safe for them to share their hurt and pain. Another one of the most common things that I see in my office is defensiveness. This is a deal killer for so many couples. It's where you try to correct how they see things. The primary trigger for defensiveness is when you're told how you did what you did, why you did it, and how you felt about it. There's this automatic desire to correct their thinking. This is always perceived as defensiveness on their end. And remember, when someone is flooded, it's about survival. And defensiveness will only make things worse. Instead of trying to explain, try to understand how they are seeing things. You know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there, Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits for Highly Effective Leaders. And in there is one of his points is seeking to understand before being understood. And this is a really good time for you to exercise that. Really try to understand where your betrayed spouse is coming from. And you won't know it if you don't let them talk and talk it out. Then you have an opportunity to have a conversation with them, but you got to listen to them first. Another thing that's pretty common is pretending like everything is okay when clearly they're upset. It may seem that ignoring the problem is going to help if your mate's flooded, but the opposite is true. What ends up happening is that they feel lonely or alone or rejected or not good enough, and usually you do too. If you can't be safe while they flood, then things will continue to spin out of control. But ask if they're okay. Ask if they'd like to talk. Ask if they need anything, and frequently they won't know what they need. But sometimes by you just asking, not rolling your eyes at the same time, but genuinely, compassionately asking, do they need anything or do they want to talk? And if they don't want to talk, they'll let you know. But to avoid showing concern for them only creates the impression you don't care or that your own comfort is more important than their healing. This is one of the biggest things that I see is that when you don't check in, it sends a signal to them, intentionally or unintentionally, that your comfort is more important than their healing or their feelings. So please don't do that. Another real common thing not to do is directing your mate in how they should talk to you. I see this pretty frequently as well. And this is all about making it more comfortable for you, which I can promise is not at the top of their to-do list when they're flooded, or even as they're working through all of the little losses, the big ones, and the grief that come along with this. It's okay to ask, but telling them what to do or how to speak, make it easier for you. It's inherently all about you. And it'll only increase the probability of escalation and intrusive thoughts. Instead, consider how you might alter your response to make it easier for your spouse or your partner then to have a conversation with you. And then telling them you know how they feel. I can promise you this, you don't. None of us will ever know fully how the other person feels. It's impossible to fully understand that. Most unfaithful spouses have no idea what it feels like to be betrayed, and trying to pretend that you do is usually an attempt to short circuit or shortcut empathy and just get your spouse to be quiet. Instead of jumping straight to empathy phrases like, I know how you feel, just try again to listen. Listen to the words they use to describe their pain and reflect that back to them. That will be so helpful for them as they heal. And again, you're going to get your time to do all that down the road. But this is where you are now. One more thing that I want to talk about, things not to do when intrusive thoughts come, and that's to shame your spouse. And you'd be surprised how frequently this happens. Let's say that after a flooding episode has passed, the unfaithful spouse might be tempted to remind the betrayed spouse how they acted while they were flooded. Not out of loving concern, but as a way to shame them and try to prevent the same behavior in the future. When we do that, it still makes it all about us and our comfort level, rather than maintaining compassion and genuine concern. Broaching the subject of their flooding and what happened during that time because of your concern for them is one thing, but trying to manage their behavior only prolongs your recovery. At the end, it just makes them more angry. And so you're going to go around that cycle over and over again. Being proactive and positive in your mate's recovery begins by accepting where they are and being genuinely concerned about their emotions. It's not about trying to get them to understand you. As you pursue recovery, there will come a day when the concerns of the unfaithful will be addressed. They will. But not till the flooding can at first be understood and soothed, and that will take many, many months for most couples. The first one is possibly to try calling a timeout. Once someone is emotionally flooded, it's impossible to be rational. If at all possible, call a timeout. If emotional flooding is an issue, come up with a protocol for calling a timeout beforehand. That agreement will at least give you opportunity to stop before potential damage occurs. And I would just want to say something about flooding and what it really is, because I see this a lot. Just being emotional is not flooding. People can cry, people can get angry and still not flooded. Flooding has to do with heart rate. You know this, if you've been walking this road for a while, that your heart rate can get up to about 100 beats a minute and you haven't even left the couch. Then you might be into this flooded state, and that's where adrenaline and other stress hormones get pumped into the blood system. And that's when nothing good is going to happen. So if you can take a break then, and it's really hard to do it, but I would recommend it highly. So another thing that can be really helpful, a better way to respond, is that when rather than telling your spouse what's wrong with what they're saying or thinking, which it is going to seem like defensiveness to them, find what's right and tell them they're right about that. Your ability to take responsibility for whatever they say that is true will help them stop escalating. Even if it's only 5%, take responsibility for that 5% and don't try to correct them on the 95% where they don't get it. You're going to get to come to all of that. This is a huge exercise in humility for all of us, and it will be incredibly helpful to your betrayed spouse. Next is appreciation. Recognize the sacrifice your mate is making by still being with you. Remember, you took a vow that you wouldn't do this once upon a time. Let them know you appreciate the fact they're still here. They're still here with you and trying to work through all of this. Acknowledge that you appreciate their effort and their sacrifice and what a huge gift that is. It will go a long way to encourage them to keep up their struggle with the emotional flooding. And when even you don't get it, but if you can try to express some appreciation to them almost daily, let me just say that, express it daily, and let's see where this goes. And next, this is a counterpoint to what I said earlier. Seek to understand. Listen, 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 and then listen some more. Get really, really good at listening. Making the effort to understand first gets the focus off of you and onto what you can do to help them heal. Listen and check with your spouse to see if they feel heard by your response to them. That goes a long way because you might be listening, but they don't feel heard, and there's some disparity there. And that, just by asking the question, do I get it? Does it feel like I understand what you're saying? And there's a going back and forth here, that's going to really help a lot. And last, one of the best things you can do when someone is flooded, one of the greatest gifts that you can give them is to be the safe container for their anger. This is not the same as allowing someone to be physically or verbally abusive. If that happens, then you do need to remove yourself. But let them talk and let them be upset. Let them feel their feelings, whatever they are, because mostly underneath their anger, you're going to get to is fear and hurt. There may be some other things too, but those are the most common. But try to feel their pain without blaming them for what you've done. Having someone who will accept them at their worst communicates that you are safe and that you love them and that you are committed to this and that you're willing to put your arms around the relationship and be willing to do whatever it takes as long as it takes. Try to be present as they talk and try to stay in a mindset of concern and compassion. One of the key takeaways from this video that I want you to have is that there is hope for managing something as chaotic as this emotional flooding. If you're unable to be safe while your mate is flooding, it only prolongs the flooding and the recovery process, both in the moment and in the long run. If you can be there for them, working to be safe for them and safe for yourself, then you can help them heal and move beyond this fight, flight, freeze cycle that you guys have probably done many times by now. Remember that your spouse didn't volunteer for this. If they are still here with you, they are at least trying to move through this hell in a way that is going to get you both to the other side so that you salvage this relationship for yourselves and for your family. If you're the betrayed spouse, I'd like to encourage you to sign up for Harboring Hope. If you're the unfaithful spouse, I'd like you to take a look at the Hope for Healing course. And for the marriage, I want you to consider doing the EMS weekend. We're doing something really new and exciting for April because of the coronavirus and all of us having to shelter in place. We're going to do it virtually this month. Rick is going to live stream his lectures. We'll still break out into small groups with therapists and couples sessions with therapists, all virtually. I'm not sure what the platform we're using yet, but it's going to be an opportunity for us to be together and do this intensive like we always do, but just virtually. So I'm glad that we have that technology to offer you. And if none of that works for you, then please consider the EMS online course. All of this addresses the pain in an expert-driven way for all three parties, the betrayed spouse, the unfaithful spouse, and for the marriage itself. And it can hopefully help you gain some stable ground for your recovery. Thanks so much for being with me again this week. It's always good to be with you, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks so much.